5 or 2 years to get me here, so I'm really happy to be here. And I'm going to be talking about Ginger Goodwin today. And it's interesting to hear Corky talking about Bert Heritage, and then Corky talking a little bit about himself as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Ginger Goodwin here, so we'll have the kind of leftist tradition in the Kootenays. And I think Corky's gone, isn't he?
Yeah.
Because I was going to tell him that likely someday somebody's going to be up here telling Corky's story. Okay, I've got a couple of pictures of Ginger Goodwin I'm going to show you first of all. So this is probably the most famous picture of Ginger Goodwin. You might have seen it. It's a picture from 1911. And it's of Ginger Goodwin standing in front of of a hotel in Cumberland. Or it might be his boarding house. And then the second picture I have is this is a picture of Ginger Goodwin in the Kootenays. And this was in the records of the Mine Mill Union Corky was mentioning. And so here's a Kootenay picture, and I'm only aware of maybe a couple of others of Ginger Goodwin in the Kootenays. And it's kind of an interesting picture. I think it must be from the 1916 election, because he's kind of gesturing toward people there. In my imagination, I imagine him up talking to some miners in Rossland. So there's the picture from 1916. Now, just in terms of his size, if you want to have a sense of how big Ginger Goodwin was, he was about a couple of inches shorter than me, and you'd have to take about 10 pounds off me, and then you would get about the size of Ginger Goodwin as I kind of figured it out.
How old would you be there in those pictures?
He's in his late 20s in those pictures. So he's in the last couple of years of his life, actually. So maybe 29 in that picture. Okay, as Craig was mentioning, we did a series of lectures at the college last year, and I did a lecture on Ginger Goodwin, and my lecture went for an hour. So what I'm going to do for you today, so I'm giving you the best 20 minutes here. And if you think I'm glossing over important points, it's probably because I am. Okay, so Albert Ginger Goodwin was a coal miner, smelter worker, labor leader, and revolutionary socialist. He spent much of his short adult life in British Columbia, on Vancouver Island, and in the Kootenays. Like many others of that harsh era of BC history, Goodwin came from the exploitative, dirty, industrial world of late Victorian England. He was born in 1887 in Deneby, Maine, in the West Riding of Yorkshire, a few miles east of Sheffield. As a young person, his family of 8 lived in 4 rooms with no running water or indoor plumbing. The working people of Deneby, Maine experienced attacks of typhoid fever due to overflowing outdoor privies and had an infant mortality rate higher than any part of the world today. At the age of 12, Goodwin followed his father, Walter, his mother's name was Mary Ann, into the mines where he experienced heavy labor, strikes, and evictions from company-owned housing, all of which appear to have left an indelible mark on him. Goodwin's father was a coal hewer. He worked, usually lying on his side, at the coal face with a pick, hacking free the coal. Goodwin himself began in the mines as a pony driver, moving coal tubs back and forth from the coal face. In 1906, so this is a year before Bert Heritage came to Nelson, Goodwin, like many other young miners in his community, left for Canada. He was recruited by the Dominion Coal Company of Cape Breton. The 19-year-old Goodwin likely came to Canada with a strong sense of class consciousness as a result of his upbringing and experience of work. His experiences in Canada made him a socialist and a union leader. In Cape Breton, Goodwin became a member of the United Mine Workers of America, and in 1909 he became involved in one of the longest and most bitter strikes in Canadian history. The issues were union recognition and wages. The company eventually broke the strike by keeping the mines running with scab labor, protected by 500 troops supplied by the Canadian government. Like many others during that strike, Goodwin moved on, and we next find him in the spring of 1910 in Michelle, British Columbia, and that's in the Crow's Nest Pass. Goodwin was playing for Michelle's team in the Crow's Nest Pass football league, and that team went on to win the league championship that year. And Goodwin's medal from that championship season represents pretty well all of his possessions that have survived. Today, the medal that he won is displayed at the Miners Museum in Cumberland on Vancouver Island. At that time, Goodwin was working as a miner in the Crow's Nest Pass, for the Crow's Nest Pass Coal Company. Now again, Goodwin did not stay long in Michelle. By the fall of 1910, he had moved on to the coalfields of Vancouver Island. Goodwin got a job as a mule driver in the No. 5 mine of Canadian Collieries. He also played for the mine's team in the BC Professional Soccer League, or Football League. More importantly, it was in Cumberland, while working for the defiantly anti-union Canadian Collieries, and among a community of miners that were fiercely class-conscious and politically active, that Goodwin became a member of the Socialist Party of Canada and an activist in the United Mine Workers of America. As part of this, Goodwin regularly attended meetings at the Socialist Hall in Cumberland, where miners discussed organization, education, and the major works of European socialism. So as a socialist, Goodwin would have been expected to know those works well. Now, William Morris, the great 19th century British socialist, described his experience of becoming a socialist as crossing a river of fire. Morris crossed the river of fire because he hated the inhumanity of life in industrial Britain and saw in socialism the measureless bounty of human life, he called it. Goodwin appears to have crossed the river of fire as a result of his experiences. He also developed a close friendship with Joe Naylor, the famous socialist president of the United Mine Workers local in Cumberland. Naylor appears as a sort of father figure for Goodwin. He hiked with him, he fished with him, he provided him an education in socialism. And what I always like to say is if Ginger Goodwin were here today, he would be shocked at how famous he's become, and that Joe Naylor is not the one who's famous. So I always like to mention Joe Naylor's name for Ginger Goodwin as his kind of father figure. So from September 1912 to August 1914, so that's 2 years, Goodwin was involved in what became known in British Columbia history as the Big Strike, which eventually included most of the coal mines on Vancouver Island. The issues again were union recognition, an end to discrimination against union members, wages, and safety. The companies evicted the miners from the company housing, brought in scab labor to operate the mines, and influenced the government to send 1,000 members of the Canadian militia to protect the scabs from striking miners and their families, and that those militiamen stayed for about a year. In all this, Goodwin was actively involved in both the Union and in the Socialist Party, and as a socialist, Goodwin was a possibilist. He believed that it was important to take immediate steps to relieve workers' suffering as a way to educate working people about the possibility of change, and also to overthrow the capitalist system. So he was opposed in the Socialist Party by the impossibility. The company made no provision for men taking time off. In other words, if you didn't work, you weren't paid, and someone else was going to take your job. At the same time, conditions in the smelter were often hot, dirty, and dangerous, and the company provided no safety equipment at all, not even gloves. As a result, many workers were burned, and some even caught on fire. Worker Camille Loriente joked that his hand had been burned so many times during this period that he was known in trail as the Black Hand. Lead poisoning was also a major hazard. Most workers who worked at or near the lead furnaces were leaded at one time or another and had lasting health problems. In Trail, Goodwin remained an active member of the Socialist Party of Canada and was the party's candidate in the 1916 provincial election, which he proved himself to be an effective speaker and organizer. During the same period, he also began to speak out against the war, telling workers that they should refuse to fight in a war started by the bosses and where they had to kill workers from other countries. Goodwin was also instrumental in organizing the first union in the smelter. By December 1916, Goodwin was the secretary-treasurer of the Trail, Mill, and Smeltermen's Union, which was affiliated eventually to the Mine Mill Union that Corky was talking about. As part of this, Goodwin worked in the Union Hall on Cedar Avenue in Trail, and he lived in the Meakin Hotel, which was known in Trail as the Working Man's Hotel. In November of 1917, Goodwin led a strike at the smelter for higher wages and the 8-hour day for all workers. As the war had dragged on, prices had risen dramatically, which hurt workers while the company did well. By the end of 1917, Consolidated Mining and Smelting was earning profits of over $1 million per year. In the meantime, the federal government, led by Robert Borden, moved towards conscription for overseas service. Goodwin had registered for conscription as was required by law, had been medically examined, and placed in category D, temporarily unfit. Now, there's been a lot of writing about this, but it appears that Goodwin suffered from severe stomach ulcers. He was chronically thin and had trouble eating. He was also known to have terrible teeth. On the 26th of November, 1917, 11 days into the strike, Goodwin received a telegram ordering his medical re-examination, which led to his reclassification as Category A, fit for overseas service. He immediately applied for an exemption due to ill health and value to his union, but the local exemption board turned him down. Now, there's no concrete evidence that Consolidated Mining and Smelting officials conspired to have Goodwin reclassified. However, I note that the two-man local exemption board, which dealt with Goodwin's case, included the prominent trail businessman Noble Binns, who was a close associate of Selwyn Blaylock, the assistant general manager of Consolidated Mining and Smelting, the official responsible for labor relations. Both Binns and Blaylock were executive members of the pro-conscription Win the War League in Trail, and both were members of the Trail Board of Trade. Blaylock was also a captain of the Trail Militia, known as the Trail Company. Eventually, on December the 20th, after 36 days on strike, the striking workers were forced back to work without achieving their goals. As one worker remembered, Blaylock had us on the ropes. We were all starving to death. After the strike, the company refused to hire any of the union leaders, and most of them left town. The union local was gone by the end of the war, and it didn't come back until the late 1930s. Goodwin's last union function was to attend the convention of the BC Federation of Labour in January of 1918. He was nominated for the position of president, but declined to let his name stand due to his problems with conscription. His final appeal against conscription was denied in April of 1918, and he was ordered to report to barracks. Goodwin refused to report and hid in the Beaufort Mountains west of Cumberland, so he went back to the island, with others who were resisting conscription and were being supplied with food by friends and supporters. On the 27th of July 1918, Constable Dan Campbell of the Dominion Police Force shot and killed Goodwin from very close range with a single bullet. Campbell was a disgraced former police officer who had obtained temporary work as part of a 3-man posse searching for draft evaders. At least a half a dozen people claimed later that they had heard Campbell boast that he was going to get deserters, dead or alive. The doctor who performed the autopsy on Goodwin believed that the bullet struck Goodwin's wrist and ricocheted into his neck, cutting his spinal cord and killing him instantly. So the hands are here, or there's a difference of opinion. There were no other eyewitnesses to dispute this. Police charged Campbell with manslaughter, but a grand jury in Victoria refused to commit him for trial, and he was set free, so he never had a trial on the case. And my comment here is it's very hard to believe that Goodwin would have escaped a trial if he had killed Dan Campbell on that day. In the years since Goodwin's killing, there has been a lingering suspicion that officials at Consolidated Mining and Smelting, like Blaylock, conspired to have Goodwin murdered. The suspicions flow from the fact that Blaylock knew William Devitt, who had been the chief of police in Rossland and was in charge of the police posse that included Dan Campbell, who killed Ginger Goodwin. I can tell you there's been no concrete evidence come light to support that charge. Goodwin himself would probably not have been interested in the question of individual guilt in his death. As a socialist, he would have focused on a broader indictment of a capitalist and militarist society that sent workers like him to war and if they resisted, sent police officers after them who sometimes killed them. Goodwin's funeral in Cumberland drew a mile-long procession. In Vancouver, workers staged a one-day general strike to protest his killing, the first general strike in British Columbia history. On the Western Front, just over 24,000 conscripts saw action by the end of the war in 1918. In 1919, the provincial government legislated the 8-hour day for all smelter workers as labor discontent peaked across Canada with the Winnipeg General Strike, and the Russian Revolution was also in the backs of the Canadian government's mind at that time. So Goodwin is justly remembered for his leadership in the struggle for the 8-hour day in Canada. However, his writings indicate that winning the 8-hour day was only part of the education process for him to prepare workers for the coming revolution, which would abolish the system. And he shared the general socialist dream, then and now, of a system where workers worked as long as they wanted, had work they enjoyed, and produced goods that people generally wanted and needed. For Goodwin, this was on the other bank across the River of Fire. This was a remarkable idea from a remarkable life that ended at the age of 31. At the same time, Goodwin has had an enduring appeal to Canadian workers and the labor movement. Ken Giorgetti worked in the smelter as a young man and headed the union there before being elected. President of the Canadian Labour Congress, spoke eloquently at the dedication of Mount Goodwin, west of Cumberland in 1989, and this is what he said. "Some people say we should remember him as a hero, and while he was a brave man, I don't think he would have wanted us to elevate him above the struggle of any other trade unionist in that time. Nor should we put his achievements out of the reach of all of us today. So when we remember Ginger Goodwin, we should not think of the hero or a martyr, but as the epitaph reads, and this is on his tombstone, a friend, a fallen comrade who gave everything in his struggle and paid the ultimate price for what he believed in." Thank you.